as introduced, I'm an internist and a cardiologist, a research epidemiologist in Dallas, Texas. I'm in clinical practice. I see patients every day. But over the course of the pandemic, I emerged as a public figure. Many of you saw me on national TV, where I appeared hundreds of times in prime time. I still do. And it's become a conclusion of mine that we have entered a time of great controversy in medicine, in my field, in medicine. And many of you, for the first time over the course of the last 5 years, may have thought or actually been convinced that you've lost trust, in doctors and nurses and advisors, in hospitals, in healthcare systems, in medical schools. How many of you believe trust has been eroded in some way? It's easily half or more. And so my research and my scholarship on this has led me to conclude in 3 major areas over the course of medical history, the medical orthodoxy or the establishment has been completely wrong on a major area of medicine. And because of that, both the medical community and certainly the public at large was significantly harmed. And so the era that we're in now, from a historical perspective, is not new. It's happened before. So I want to give you some working examples. And I'll give you some of the citations so you can locate them in your mind, or if you wanted to research this further. The first is what I call the first great cocaine epidemic. And the time period is roughly 1860 to 1920. Listen to some of these published sources. This is in the National Library of Medicine. Joseph Spillane, the title of his work, Cocaine, Medical Marvel to Modern Menace in the United States, 1884-1920. Widenga and Gilchrist, regarding cocaine, From Gold Medal Glory to Prohibition, the Early Evolution of Cocaine in the United States and the United Kingdom. And here's one from Douglas Small, Cocaine and the Ideal Victorian Medical Man. The ideal medical man. Cocaine, as many of you recognize, is one of the most powerfully addictive substances known to mankind. But it was an early version of all of the pharmaceuticals offered by Merck and Park Davis and Bristol Myers Squibb, all the pharmaceutical companies. It was part of a therapy that doctors would apply for an entire range of treatments. And it did have remarkable physical effects on the human body. Remarkable. Halsted, the father of modern surgery at Johns Hopkins, used it as part of an anesthesia approach. And it did have remarkable effects on patients. Halsted himself became a brutal cocaine addict. Sigmund Freud, many of you recognize him, trailblazing psychiatrist, became a cocaine addict. Cocaine had then been incorporated into commercial products. Coca-Cola contained cocaine. The advertisement said, if you're weary shopping, stop and get a Coca-Cola and be lifted up so you could continue shopping. It was in Chianti wine. So all different types of candies. It became so bad, the entire medical community became hooked on cocaine. The public became hooked on cocaine. Woodrow Wilson in 1913 had to intercede and said, listen, we've got dangerous narcotics. We've got to start controlling this. 1920, the British actually had published the Dangerous Narcotics Act that essentially took cocaine away from the doctors. Virtually every paper in New England Journal of Medicine and British Medical Journal and Lancet was describing the miraculous effects of cocaine. In fact, in JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association, there was only one manuscript published over that period of time that expressed any concern regarding the dangers of cocaine. One paper, one in 60 years. The point of the first great cocaine epidemic is doctors did not recognize how dangerous something was that they were working with and they were promoting, and they didn't quickly turn around. In fact, it took government intervention to end this first great cocaine epidemic. That's the first example. The second example is what I call Smokefest. Smokefest, cigarette smoking, 1920 to 1978. Astonishing. Looking in the audience here, not a single person is smoking. Not a one. I can't even smell cigarette smoke. When I walked in from outside, I didn't see anybody smoking. But if we went back in time to 1920, 1930, 1940, everyone would be smoking here. At least 80% would be smoking. People smoked in the workplace. Doctors smoked in the clinic. Doctors smoked in the operating room. Patients smoked in the clinic. Gardner and Brandt published on this, and the title of the paper was "The Doctor's Choice is America's Choice," and it highlights American Tobacco and their physician campaign with Lucky Strikes, Philip Morris, in their Saturday Evening Post, famous advertisements, doctors advertising cigarettes. And RGR Rental actually had a campaign that involved 113,000 doctors regularly offering cigarettes to their patients. Okay. Who are the heroes here? Sir Austin Bradford Hill, an epidemiologist, not a medical doctor, and Richard Dahl in the UK. They present in 1949 an analysis of a cross-sectional study to the Medical Research Council and conclude smoking is causing lung cancer and people are dying of lung cancer. They made the connection. There's been some others who had hints. It wasn't hard to conceive that this blackened grayish smoke could be causing these blackened tumors that doctors were taking out of the chest. It wasn't hard to figure it out, but they provided the evidence. And indeed, I've just walked out of the camera angle there. I'm so sorry, but I felt so far away from everyone. And so the Medical Research Council said, we don't believe it. We don't believe it. Do more research. So over the next 3 years, they did the British physicians smoking study. And they reported back that at least half of the deaths among the British doctors were smoking related. It's 1954. The medical community still doesn't believe it. Nothing happens in the United States. Nothing. This just keeps going and going. 1964, Luther Terry, Surgeon General, a courageous Surgeon General, compiles all the information. Now he has nearly 1,000 references. He calls the medical leaders to Washington in a very famous meeting. Chief of medicine at the Mayo Clinic and Harvard and all the esteemed institutions, all smoking, and said, guys, I have bad news for you. Smoking causes lung cancer, and that's leading to premature death. There's still resistance. U.S. Surgeon General, there's still resistance. And the American Medical Association, at the time, that was the big physician group, the American Medical Association delays any type of campaign out there until 1978. 1978. Think about that, 1920 to 1978. What happened to Sir Austin Bradford Hill? He developed tuberculosis. He got sick. He survived. But Richard Dahl was the physician, and he was discredited. He was smeared. He was canceled. If he would have had a Twitter account, it would have been, blocked. And in fact, the tobacco industry tried to destroy Richard Dahl. Tried to destroy him. He survived it and lived long enough to have the world recognize that he was right. And a wonderful piece was published by Conrad Keating, and it was titled "Smoking Kills: The Revolutionary Life of Sir Richard Dahl." This is extraordinary. We didn't have the tobacco settlement to ultimately try to make reparations for the harms until the 1990s. So it happened with cocaine. The medical community was dead wrong. It happened with smoking. They were dead wrong for decades. And now we enter the current great controversy. This has been brewing. Now, you're going to get a copy of this book, and I want to sign them after I'm done here around lunchtime. It's called Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. It's just been released. It's like #1 in all the categories on Amazon. It's written primarily by John Leake, who's considered now the world's greatest historian. He is remarkable in terms of his investigative skills, and his writing is unparalleled. It is a rapid, moving, gripping story of how this all happened. You're just going to be, I think, blown away. In fact, we had difficulty trying to figure out where we're going to start with this. Where are we going to start? We could find some evidence in Egypt and Africa that maybe there was some early experimentation with the concepts of vaccination, but we picked the timeline. We started with Cotton Mather. Anybody here know who Cotton Mather is? Good for you. Oh, a couple. Good. There's the readers. Cotton Mather, 1721, is a Puritan minister, Boston, Massachusetts. He watches several of his children die of measles. Can you imagine, as a parent, feeling helpless as your child dies of some form of illness? Now, they didn't know at the time that that was an infection. They certainly didn't know it was a virus. They really didn't know what was causing it, but it was terrifying. Even more terrifying to the community at large was smallpox. Smallpox would sweep into communities and just ravage them. No one knew how it was transmitted, what was causing it. And so Cotton Mather, with Dr. Boylston in Boston, started a campaign of attempting what's called variolation. Variolation was taking a little bit of the pus from one child with smallpox with a scalpel, then taking the next child and making a little nick in the skin and putting a little pus in that skin. So the concept was transmitting a little bit of smallpox to the next child. Hopefully they wouldn't get too sick, but that could confer some protection, because there was this observation that maybe that would indeed be the case. That's 1721. Now, Ben Franklin was writing about this in one of his daily newspapers, and he was mocking this idea, mocking it. And sure enough, his son, Frankie, dies of smallpox. And so Ben Franklin does a 180 and starts to really support this. But Cotton Mather, as he got going with this concept, not knowing if it worked or not, knowing if it was safe or not, really not knowing what the disease was, proclaimed that this was a gift from God. A gift from God. He proclaimed this. That's how this whole thing started. Now, Cotton Mather is also well known for another role he played, is he was a senior advisor to the judges in the Salem witchcraft trials. So he believed in variolation as a gift from God, but he also believed in witches. And he was very influential. That's how this got going. Then Edward Jenner in Gloucester, United Kingdom, attempts to take cowpox material and then use it as a form of a primordial vaccine for smallpox. And then this incredible fervor develops. And as the smallpox vaccination campaign went on for decades, there was really no impact in reduction in rates of smallpox. But yet some people would die immediately after taking the vaccine. Notably, King George III, they had 15 kids. 2 of the children died almost immediately of smallpox after they underwent variolation. But yet, King George pressed on with this. And, you know, you have to wonder what would be in the mind of someone to do that. He may think, listen, this worked on the other 13 kids. We lost 2. And you can imagine not knowing how the disease was spread, what causes it, any of the principles of virology, immunology, or vaccinology. There was great confusion. But from the very beginning, we observed that there was wild experimentation. There was tremendous hubris and arrogance, irrational exuberance that people doing this would liberate populations from terrible diseases. And there was always money and there was always power from the very beginning. In fact, Edward Jenner was at the right hand of the king, became a very wealthy man. And we move on to Louis Pasteur and through the history of vaccinology. But when we stir together those ingredients, you can see what has happened over the course of time. People were put in jail towards the end of the 19th century for refusing the smallpox vaccine. Put in jail. I think it was bad losing your job for refusing the COVID vaccine. People were put in jail. Jail time. It became so bad, it led in the UK to the Anti-Vaccination League. So listen, we're going to stand up. They marched against this. And in one city in England said, listen, we're not going along with this at all. Leicester, England. And they said, listen, we have a different method. When a child gets smallpox, instead of letting him crawl over his brothers and sisters and all over, we're going to isolate him, keep him clean, and try to reduce the spread that way. They had the right approach. Leicester had some of the best smallpox statistics of all time. They didn't have anybody take the vaccine in that town. So as we learned, what really brought infectious diseases under control was better sanitation, better living conditions. Quarantines did work, improved food and water, separating clean water from sewage water. And all diseases went down, even ones for which there were no vaccines, including erysipelas and scarlet fever. Tuberculosis came under control because of screening and detection and anti-tuberculous drugs. Anybody remember tuberculosis sanatoriums? Remember those? Yeah. We had no answer for that. People would actually have to go to institutions with TB. There's no widespread effective vaccine for TB. So modern sanitation brought infectious diseases under control, not vaccines. In fact, every single illness, the mortality was going down dramatically by 90% or more before the first vaccine came into use. And that includes smallpox, polio, measles, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, all of them. They all came under great control. In fact, in periods of time where vaccines were suspended for various problems, like in Sweden, there was a problem with the pertussis vaccine. It was suspended for 17 years. There was no rebound in pertussis because we have this under control. In fact, pertussis is very easily treated with antibiotics, particularly azithromycin or Z-Pak. In my adult medicine career, I've never even tested for diphtheria and pertussis. Who knows how many cases I saw? It doesn't matter because I treated them with antibiotics. The vaccine is irrelevant at this point in time. So this incredible fervor for vaccines has been building over time. And there's an important inflection point, and that's 1986. And what happened in 1986 is things had come to a head with children having side effects from vaccines, okay, side effects. Particularly the cellular pertussis vaccine. And then this emergence of putting vaccines in combination. The first one was diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. The second one was measles, mumps, and rubella. There were so many lawsuits against the companies. Eli Lilly approached the Reagan administration and Health and Human Services and said, listen, we can't bear this. You know, we need protection. And so the government granted the vaccine companies liability protection. So if any child was injured or damaged after a vaccine, that in fact the companies were free of any financial responsibility. It could go to a vaccine court, a compensation court, and there would be some type of award given to the family of the child who was injured. Well, in 2007 and 2008, the first big omnibus or group of cases came forward to be adjudicated. And there were several test cases chosen. And the condition people were most worried about was autism or autism spectrum disorder. And one of the test cases was a little girl named Hannah Poling. Hannah was 19 months old. She had missed several of her vaccines, so she was given a big bundle of vaccines all at once. Well over a dozen shots all at once. Her father is Jonathan Poling, and he is a neurologist at Johns Hopkins University. The child takes this big bundle of shots. Now, she's completely normal before the shots, and he documents this carefully. Completely normal. She takes this big bundle of shots. She develops a fever, becomes ill, has a transient rash, and over the next several weeks to months, she develops the classic symptoms of autism and is forever changed. Her intellectual development, her social and psychiatric development, it's all forever changed. He chronicles all this. And in fact, she has genetic testing, and she's found to have a relatively subtle genetic polymorphism in a mitochondrial enzyme. Hard to know if that played any role, but this is all written up and published in a paper. And so when his test case was evaluated by the vaccine court, it was so compelling that the vaccines triggered autism in this child. The court brought him over to the side and said, we're going to make a deal with you. We're going to make a settlement with you if you take it. And that he took it. He stepped down from Johns Hopkins. He took the settlement. He moved his family to Athens, Georgia. Immediately, the vaccine court took the other 5,000 cases and threw them out and said, nope, your cases are not valid. That's what happened. That's the history of this. Now, you have all been through this COVID-19 vaccine campaign. All of you. All of you have been through the illness. As introduced, I've testified multiple times in Washington, and I'm very familiar with the findings that we have from investigative committees, including the last one where I testified in May of 2021. In brief, the US and Chinese were working in a collaboration to create a very dangerous virus, intentionally. They had been working on this at least since 2012, publishing their findings. Obama institutes a ban on gain of research funding for federally funded projects. The collaboration, which is Ralph Barrick at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Peter Daszak at the EcoHealth Alliance, who's the go-between, Anthony Fauci and his whole group at the National Institutes of Health, and Dr. Xingling Li, the bat lady in Wuhan. That's the group. They're publishing the papers. They're saying it's gain-of-function research. They say that now they're outsourcing it to Wuhan, China. The goal is to make a virus that, and in their papers, in their 2016 papers, they said, we've done it. We've created the virus. It's called a SARS-like Wuhan Institute of Virology 1 virus that's poised for human emergence. It's right there. The papers are in the National Academy of Sciences and the Nature of Medicine. It's in the open. The virus somehow gets out of the lab in 2019, and you know the rest of the story. There was tremendous planning for worldwide mass vaccination of a coronavirus. In 2012, it's still on their website. You can check it out right now. DARPA, the research unit of the military, initiated a program in 2012 called the ADEPT P3 program. The goal of the program will end pandemic in 60 days using messenger RNA vaccines, genetic vaccines. That's an aspiration in 2012. It wasn't just didn't come under Operation Warp Speed. Somebody should have briefed Trump. They should have told him, listen, we've been working on this for a long time. Now it's go time with the Wuhan virus. Yet it was presented to us that this virus, and this was Anthony Fauci's great effort of fraud, came out of nature, that he didn't know where it came from. The WHO promoted this campaign. Everyone knew it came out of the lab. Yet for over a year, they told us it came out of nature while they were working to cover this up. People started getting sick. I heard about a man who got sick in April of 2020. My father got sick with COVID in April of 2020. We're still trying to figure this out as doctors. What should we do? Doctors are not typically the first line responders for anything. We're not adept at dealing with some type of national crisis. But yet it fell on us. The government agencies treated no one. No one. It was doctors like myself that treated patients. Some of us did. But the majority of medical centers developed no treatment programs for patients. None. They didn't set up tents outside, getting people the right medicines, didn't send programs to check on people. They simply said, wait until you get sick enough and then get in the hospital, and then we'll start treatment. Well, I can tell you as a medical doctor, we don't treat any pneumonia like that. There's not a single pneumonia where delayed treatment is good. It's early treatment for an infection makes a huge difference in outcomes. Everyone should have questioned that. Grandmothers and great-grandmothers knew that. Yet that's what we were told. A great deception that led to incredible harm. April 2020, Bill Gates, who is a major investor in vaccines, goes on national TV and he said, I don't think this crisis is going to be over with until every person in the world takes a vaccine. How did he know a vaccine would even be successful? The trials weren't even done yet. How did he know? Yet he came out and said that. Yet everyone in the media then adopted a position that really we should do nothing until we are saved by a vaccine. Remember Eastern European patriot freedom fighter Arnold Schwarzenegger? Remember him? Yeah. What was his famous line? Screw your freedoms. Remember that? Oh yeah, suddenly freedom doesn't matter. Take a vaccine. You can't have your freedom until you take a vaccine. That's what we were told. Yet we weren't told much about the new vaccines. What were they? Well, they were an array of different vaccines. In fact, in different countries, they were very different. The Chinese used a killed virus vaccine. Europe used what's called an adenoviral vector, a new form of genetic vaccine. We had a similar one in the United States, Janssen. And then we really featured the messenger RNA vaccines, a new genetic technology that could install the genetic code in the body to produce a protein. The protein selected for the COVID-19 vaccines, in every single one of them, was the spike protein. The spike protein is the spine on the surface of the virus. That spike protein was the part that was engineered in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That was the target protein. I can tell you as a doctor, it's the most lethal protein I've ever seen in my life. Makes staphylococcal toxin look like child's play. This protein damages the heart, causes blood clots, damages every tissue it touches, turns off cancer surveillance systems, and the human body cannot break it down. It's unassailable in terms of our enzyme. You take a tetanus shot, within a few days, your body breaks down the tetanus toxin. It's gone. You take one of these shots, the genetic code produces the spike protein for an uncontrolled duration and an uncontrolled quantity of time. The very first person who took a plunge with these vaccines, no one could have known what was going to happen, how long they were going to last, and what the side effects would be. No one could have known. The studies that were used to approve the products on December 10th, 2020, involved 1 month of getting 2 shots and 2 months of observation. No one in the world could have known what was going to happen on month 4 or 5. No one. Yet people came out on TV. The vaccine is working. It's stopping the infection. How did they know? People started to lose their minds. Do you remember that Richard Colbert late night TV show where everyone dressed up like a vaccine syringe and they started dancing around? You remember Jimmy Kimmel said, for those who didn't take the vaccine, die wheezy. You remember that? Remember how vindictive people were? How this divided people? It was just like the smallpox divided. People were worried about the smallpox. They didn't want their kids dying of the smallpox vaccine, which happened. The same thing here. People were concerned, rightfully so. And the vaccine started to divide us. Many people, I think the majority of people who took the shots, they felt forced into it because of the pressure from employers or families or churches or others. What took over is what's called vaccine ideology. This is very important for you who are in theology. It's very important. Vaccine ideology states this, that mankind is vulnerable to infectious diseases. We're susceptible. We're fearful. But through the brilliance of man and vaccine science, man can improve upon God's creation. Yes, man can do better than God. But because the vaccines aren't perfect, everyone must take them. Everyone. You may wonder, why do little 6-month-old babies have to take it? Why do people who have already had COVID have to take it? Why do groups that we never give new things to, like pregnant women, why do they have to take it? It's vaccine ideology. It says everyone must take it, without exception. And if someone is hurt, or someone's injured, or disabled, or sadly, if they die from the vaccine, they have to take that and accept that for the betterment of humanity, the greater good. That's what vaccine ideology says. That's in the minds of people who seem irrational about the vaccines. And you know people like this because if you want to get into a conversation, they'll say, I don't want to talk about it. Medical schools have no review of vaccine safety. There's no grand rounds on this. There's no discussions allowed. We have continuing medical education conferences, no conferences on this topic, not allowed. We have thousands of peer-reviewed manuscripts now in databases concluding the COVID vaccines were grossly unsafe. Grossly unsafe. Our CDC has certified 19,400 Americans who've died after the vaccine. That's where they have the death certificates. The doctors have reported, the doctors have concluded the vaccine is a cause of death. 19,400. Typically 5, 10, 15 deaths. Things get pulled off the market. Something's wrong. We can't have a healthy person come in and take a shot and then lose their life, especially for an illness that is characteristically mild in healthy people. It's treatable. That is completely unacceptable. First, that's the ultimate human sacrifice. Come in and take a shot and die. Yet in the CDC data, 1,000 Americans came into vaccine centers and they died in the vaccine center or a few hours afterwards. It was so bad, they actually had to outfit them with CPR and defibrillation and all of this. Another 1,000 died the next day. But it didn't stop there. The genetic code keeps producing this spike protein and it builds up in the body, and suddenly people were having cardiac arrests and blood clots and strokes. It's become catastrophic. There are thousands of papers in the peer-reviewed literature on this. The first conclusive death, autopsy proven that the vaccine caused the death, occurred in a young man in his 20s or 30s. He took Moderna, started developing chest pain, went into Washington University Hospital in St. Louis, not that far from here. He dies right in front of them. They can't resuscitate him. They do an autopsy. The heart is full of vaccine inflammation and spike protein. It's in the New England Journal of Medicine, August of 2021. The Moderna vaccine killed this man. No warnings, no messages. Doctors didn't say anything. The FDA doesn't say anything. In fact, my most recent Senate testimony in May of 2021 is in the Permanent Subcommittee for Investigations concluded there was a massive cover-up that the vaccines were causing heart damage and death. A massive cover-up, and that was part of it. I presented that case. First authors Verma and colleagues. And then Gill in Connecticut is the coroner there. He receives 2 boys, aged 16 and 17. They die on days 3 to 4 after Pfizer. The parents find them dead in bed. These are healthy boys who just took the Pfizer vaccine. They do an autopsy. The coroner says, I've never seen this before. He calls in pathologists from University of Michigan and University of Minnesota. They conclude the vaccine is the cause of death. Published in Archives of Pathology. To this day, the vaccine manufacturers and the FDA don't warn people that they can lose their life after taking a shot. There's no warning. We've never seen this before. Or maybe we have with vaccines. This is astounding. If you took a COVID-19 vaccine, you should feel very lucky to be alive. So when I went on Joe Rogan, and for you young people who watch Joe Rogan, I actually never watched him before I went on. I was told I set all the records in the history of his podcast and went up to the White House. There's all this communication and controversy. What did Dr. McCullough say? The toughest question Joe Rogan asked me said, Dr. McCullough, if these vaccines are so bad, why are some people fine after they take them, which is true, and why are some people dead? I had no answer. I didn't know. However, research found the answer. Dr. Vibeke Manichi in Denmark analyzed data from Sweden and from the Czech Republic, and now it's been done in the United States. Joe Ladapo, the Surgeon General in Florida, did it as well. Fortunately, a lot of people who took the shots got essentially a dud or a placebo or minimal vaccine material, and they're fine. Some people must have gotten super loaded vials. The earlier shots were far more dangerous than the later shots. Although even people taking shots this year, there's several hundred deaths, so it's still occurring. They're still not safe. But there was a tremendous variation from vial to vial. There was imperfect manufacturing. We now can do a blood test. And by the way, I encourage you to get this blood test if you've taken a shot. It's the antibody against the spike protein. The spike protein is what's loaded in you after the vaccine. The antibody is an indirect reflection of how much of this stuff has your body experienced. Now, the antibody will go up after COVID and will go down. So COVID exposes you to this, but as well as the vaccine. But the test now, the LabCorp test, goes on a range from 0.8 to 25,000. It's quite a range. Many, many published studies on this. I have thousands of patients and experience on this. If the numbers between 0 and 1,000 on this spike antibody test or COVID antibody test, you can now order it yourself on LabCorp. You don't even need a doctor. You can just go on LabCorp website, go to Labs on Demand, order it, $69. Be very informative. If you're 0 to 1,000, you can breathe easy. You've had a light brush with this. This is now going to be of no threat to you. Greater than 1,000, we start to worry. Greater than 5,000 on this test, we actually start to find the circulating spike protein in the bloodstream. That's not good. It should never be good to have a foreign protein devised in a Chinese biosecurity lab circulating in your blood or in your tissues. That's common sense. That should not be there. 10, 15,000, 20,000, predictably blood clots, future cardiac arrests, strokes, all kinds of disasters. All kinds of disasters. And they're still going on. And every time we hear about a friend or a family member and the new situation, we just shake our heads like, oh my gosh, when is this going to end? So a friend of ours who we vacationed with just a few months ago, they're from Toronto, he was complaining of some mild headaches. He had taken several shots years ago, and now he's fighting for his life in an ICU in Toronto with a major intracranial hemorrhage. The spike protein degrades and dissolves some of the small blood vessels in the brain and causes hemorrhage. This has been shown in a paper from Japan by Ota and colleagues. It's proven. It's not controversial. Yet the frustration that patients and their families will have is the doctors will say it's not due to the vaccine. And patients will say, why don't you just examine the tissues for the spike protein and for presence of the vaccine? They won't do it. We don't know what's causing this, but it's not the vaccine. It's the same story for autism and neuropsychiatric disorders. We don't know what's causing this epidemic of autism, but we know it's not the vaccines. We'll say, well, what about peanut allergies and food allergies? They seem to come out of nowhere. Now you can't even bring a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in elementary school. Well, we don't know what's causing that either, but it's not the vaccines. The vaccines went from just a few shots when I was a kid now to a long battery of shots in kids, including the COVID vaccines. Is it possible that this wonderful world of vaccines has gone too far now? Like with anything in the history of man, could this have gone too far? Nuclear warfare, dynamite, prefrontal lobotomy, nerve gas. A lot of these won Nobel Prizes, actually, but they turned out to be wrong ideas. That's caused great harm. Is it surprising the medical community is not coming out and expressing concerns outside of me and a few other prominent doctors? No, it's not surprising. They didn't do it for cocaine, and they didn't do it for smoking, and they're not doing it for vaccines. So this is really coming to a head. What we've learned in this time of great controversy is now is a time for the public to discern, to do your own research. Let your own common sense start to guide you here. Unfortunately, we can't accept everything we hear on face value. There's too much bias there. There's too much religious ideology around vaccines. There's too much conflict of interest. Some people's livelihoods are directly connected to these. But we know one thing is that we are headed for more of it. The WHO has an aspiration in a Agenda 2030 slide on their website. They aspire to have 500 vaccines rolled out to countries, underserved countries. 500 per individual? What is the limit? I've counted in myself As a medical doctor, I probably take more vaccines than I've traveled different places in the world. I've taken 69 shots. 69 shots. Taken plenty of vaccines. But in the warnings on these vaccines, there are clear warnings. I'll give you one flu shot. Probably many of you take a flu shot. I took a flu shot every year because I was told to take one. I had to be on medical staff. Well, the chances of me or you getting flu any year is way less than 1%. No wonder I probably never even came in contact with it. There's like 4 FDA-approved drugs to treat flu, and we can get people through influenza. But yet I was told to take a flu shot to be a medical staff, and I did it. In the warnings there, it says right there, causes Guillain-Barré syndrome. In some unlucky people, they start to become paralyzed. It happens. And I'll never forget, I talked to my brother who also had taken a lot of vaccines, and he said one of his colleagues at work took his annual flu shot, and now he's paralyzed in bed. He like for never walk again. He was on a ventilator for a long time, and now he's just in bed, paralyzed. The point is, it happens. With every medicine or vaccine or surgery, there are risks and benefits, and we have to fairly weigh them in terms of risks and make our own decisions. So for me in the flu shot, my risk is really low. I'm young and healthy. There's medicines to treat it anyway. Maybe it's reasonable for me to forget the flu shot. Why take any risk of Guillain-Barré syndrome? For a healthy person to come in and take a shot and become very unhealthy or die should be an unacceptable outcome, because we always have other management approaches. We always do. I'll leave you with one final kind of weighty thing. Some of you think about vaccines, and I've done the same thing, and you'll say, wait a minute, Dr. McCullough, what about polio? What about polio? Terrible, the iron lung machine, kids crippled. I actually have some polio survivors in my practice. 1952, the worst year of polio ever, just before the vaccines were released. How many cases of paralytic polio did we have in the United States? We had good statistics. Answer, 24,000 kids were paralyzed with polio. About 3,000 died. Nowadays, I don't think anybody would die of polio, because with modern ventilation and all the things we do, probably there'd be treatments if we actually had polio cases. However, it's been said, listen, polio ushered out this case count of polio. And I think it's true. I think the polio shots improved over time. I was like double, triple vaccinated for polio. My parents were scared to death of that. However, with the big bundle of vaccines now, our CDC is reporting to us that 3.2% of children now have autism. 3.2%, and growing rapidly. Attention deficit disorder now is 13% of the country and growing rapidly. We're told there's no known cause of this, but yet multiple studies seem to point about, early in neurologic development and immunologic development receiving a big battery of shots. It's clear, this is clear, if a child before the age of 9 has a febrile seizure, if something happens to them, infection or a big bundle of vaccines, they develop a high fever and they have a seizure at home, it's clear an outcome can be sudden death, sudden infant death. And it turns out, the vast majority of sudden infant deaths of healthy babies under 1 occur right after a bundle of vaccines. And then another outcome, in 40% of cases, in a paper published by Nielsen in Sweden, 40% of cases, the febrile seizure triggers autism. They become autistic. The brain is damaged from that seizure. That's clear. Of those with autism, 27% are profoundly autistic. Profound autism means marked reduction in intellectual capabilities, IQs less than 50, repetitive behaviors, head banging, uncontrollable screaming, cannot communicate, cannot toilet, wearing diapers, cannot manage in the shower. All of this happens before the age of 9. Permanently in the category of needing lifelong special needs. 27% of all the kids with autism are that severe. Some states, the rates of autism are very high, like California. It's over 5%. So I'm telling you right now, over 1% of California children are heavily dependent on special needs and growing. What's the burden of that? I told you, in the worst year of polio, it was 24,000 kids were paralyzed, 3,000 died. Right now, as we sit here today, the number of profound autistic kids, easily as disabled as a polio child, is 275,000. We have to weigh out from a population perspective, what are we doing? Many parents are saying, listen, I can't take it anymore. We just don't have the threats of diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis. Polio has been out of the water supply for decades. Now there are 6 studies showing if parents opt out of taking all the vaccines, the children are healthier. Maybe some of your kids have done that. I didn't do that. My kids took all the shots, but there are 6 studies, at least 6 studies showing that. World Council for Health, another advisory panel says, listen, until this is looking serious, until we know more, pause on these vaccines. A child born today who's healthy, pause on the vaccines. Children with certain vulnerabilities or other problems, maybe we should do these batteries of vaccines. COVID-19 vaccines, I made the call in the U.S. Senate in 2022, not safe for human use. I reiterated that European Parliament, U.S. House and Congress, multiple societies are all saying not safe for human use. Fortunately, very few people are taking COVID vaccines. Very few, probably less than 1%. Our CDC won't tell us what the number is. But as we sit here today, 81% of Americans took 1 or more shots. 70% took 2 shots. I didn't take the COVID shots, and I thank the Lord for the guidance on that. But if you've taken a shot or if you've had COVID, you probably are going to want to get the blood test, and you're going to look at what we're trying to do to help people clear the body of the vaccine spike protein, and that's through a process called spike detoxification. There are some natural products that you can take as over-the-counter products that help clear the body spike protein. There are no prescription drugs that do it, but they include nattokinase, bromelain, curcumin, probably some other enzymes. They're combined in a singular product by multiple companies. I advise one of them, the Wellness Company. So I'll stop here. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough from Dallas, Texas. Thank you so much for listening.
Well, thank you, Doctor. I couldn't help but reminisce about the days of smoking cigarettes. When you talk about 80% of people actually smoke cigarettes, and it's interesting, it included the professional classes, and it just ran the whole spectrum and other things. So the question that arose in my mind is, what does that say about us in general if we're just continually led down the primrose path of what the experts tell us? It's quite an interesting question. I wonder if you could comment on that.
It's hard to know. I grew up, my dad was a chain smoker. He worked in a factory, and I'll never forget, getting in the car on a cold winter day. The windows are all rolled up and my dad's smoking, and the whole car becomes gray. What does come into the minds of people? Obviously, these are terribly addictive things. So I think the addiction overrules common sense. God made our lungs to breathe in clean, fresh air, not to breathe in gray smoke. Just think about natural. God made our skin to be what it looks and feels like, probably not to have blue ink injected into it or green ink. Think about these basic things. People say, well, what about medicines? Are all medicines bad? Many ways to think about it. Hopefully God works through doctors and nurses and hospitals and surgeons to help us, through the Holy Spirit, heal others. I mean, I work with medications all day long. I'm doing the best I can to help people, and we have made great progress. The average man only lived to age 48 in 1900. Now, an average man hopefully can make it to 78 now or 80. Many of you have relatives over 80. How many of you have relatives over 90? Made it over 90. There you go. Anybody make it over 100? There you go. Well, there's an important study published years ago. It asked the question, how many people make it over age 80 with no prescription medications? They can actually make it just kind of a la naturale. And the answer is about 10%. About 90%, or something's going to happen. Thyroid needs some support, or diabetes, or blood pressure. So I've already blown that one. Everyone in my family has terrible high blood pressure. My family's from Ireland. Every man died in their 40s. in my family history. And they died of what looked like stroke or heart failure, which is untreated high blood pressure. So I kind of succumbed to taking blood pressure medicine for many, many decades. And so far, I'm upright at age 62. So modern medicine does deliver. Many of you have needed a surgery for something, and hopefully it delivered. Many of you had cancer and treated for cancer. How many here are cancer survivors? Right? So I think we have to discern not all medicine can be bad. Certainly not all vaccines are bad. Part of the reality of our book is we point out the wonderful things of vaccines delivering lower case counts of measles and smallpox and mumps and chickenpox, etc. But for every vaccine, there's, again, a risk and a benefit. Here's one I didn't know about. How many of you had chickenpox as kids? Yeah, I had chickenpox too. How many of you had kids who had chickenpox? But less. I mean, my kids didn't have chickenpox because they took the chickenpox vaccine. I mean, isn't that a good thing? Well, yes, they didn't have chickenpox, but now my kids as adults and your kids face a higher risk of shingles. So there's no free lunch with any of these. And this is the things these are the parts of science that we have to weigh out. And I think we have to refrain from smears. People say, well, you're an anti-vaxxer. It's like, what? It's like saying I'm an antibiotic person, or I'm an anti-blood pressure. We're not anti anything in medicine. They're just things that we use, and we have to discuss them rationally. The American Academy of Pediatrics, again, a medical society of pediatricians, going against the CDC, and the CDC is not saying the kids can't take them, but just kind of relaxing this suggestion. The vaccines are not being taken away. And sure enough, and you'll see this actually on my Substack. If you go to Substack Focal Points, make sure you sign up. It's free to get these updates every day. We have the funding sources from the American Academy of Pediatrics. It's right there on their website. It's the 4 major vaccine companies. So we have to understand, vaccine companies are in the business of making money. Why wouldn't they push a doctor society to advocate for their products to make revenue? To make matters worse, a large number of vaccines are purchased by the government. I personally think the government needs to get out of the vaccine business. We shouldn't be handing money over to companies to do vaccine development. RFK shut down 22 programs. There's hundreds more. But we shouldn't be giving government handouts of our money to vaccine companies. Let them use their own money. They actually do very well financially, and they can develop products and compete in the marketplace. And the government shouldn't be buying vaccines. Again, they should compete in the marketplace. Yes?
I have 2 questions, and they're related. One is about detoxing from vaccines in general. I believe one of the going theories about vaccines causing problems for people is that it injects them with heavy metal content or some other things, especially if they were already having some heavy metals in their body, or push them over the edge in terms of what their body can handle. So what do you think about that theory is kind of the first question. How will be ways to detox from the heavy metals in vaccines that may be causing some of that, if that is what you think is a factor? And the second one is kind of genetic testing related to vaccines. So how close are we getting to maybe personalized medicine where it'd be possible to say, you're a good candidate for this vaccine, but you have a family history of being safe and being able to accept it, but you're not a good candidate for this vaccine because your family has a history of adverse reactions or something like that?
Those are great questions. I can tell you're probably in the scientific or medical field. Those questions deserve major research projects and funding. The federal government will not fund a study to investigate vaccine safety, not a single one. So we're left with questions. There are trace metals in vaccines. Aluminum is the most common one, used as an adjuvant. Mercury is largely out of the vaccines. There was only 4% of vaccines that had mercury in them, and Kennedy and his group just ordered the mercury out. Of interest, the last flu shot I took in 2021, it was one of the 4% mercury-containing flu shots. I mean, I'm just telling you, I wasn't paying attention. But I can tell you, as a medical doctor, the picture of attention deficit disorder and autism is not the clinical picture of aluminum encephalopathy. I know what that is because I saw that. In fact, we used to administer aluminum to dialysis patients, and it's almost more of a dementia picture. It doesn't look that way. Mercury poisoning in the old days, anybody know what that was called in the old days? Mad Hatter disease, yeah. So that's like a madness, a delusional madness. That doesn't fit either. So I don't think the heavy metals are explanatory, but this idea of immuno dysregulation, so developing a ton of inflammatory factors called cytokines, which for sure happen after a big battery of vaccines, having them go into the brain, causing an acute illness, a seizure or near seizure, and then brain damage is very tractable. I mean, the CDC's published papers on this saying, yes, this actually happens. So the great concern here is that it's too much. And as a general rule for vaccines, I think they're far safer if they are given individually as opposed to in big bundles on the same day. They're far safer if they're given later in life. Later in life, once we're beyond the period of neurological and immunological development. And very importantly, it's far safer when they're given at the right time. So the best example is the hepatitis B vaccine. So when my kids were born, they weren't given any vaccines on the first day of life, but now the hepatitis B vaccine is given on the first day of life to all children in the United States. Yet it's only needed if the mother has hepatitis B, and we screen all the mothers with hepatitis B, or the woman's an IV drug abuser, and we haven't had a chance to screen her. A healthy child born today has no business getting the hepatitis B vaccine. And it's been studied, if they follow the childhood schedule of getting all these early hepatitis B vaccines, by the time they really need the vaccine when they go to paramedic school or nursing school or medical school, they don't even have any coverage. So the hepatitis B vaccine is a good example of, reasonably safe vaccine, reasonably appropriate vaccine, but given at the wrong time. We ought to give that much later in life. And other things, rubella, the same thing, much later in life. And little boys shouldn't be getting rubella because they don't get serious rubella. It's only women who can become pregnant. So I think we can go to a much more risk stratified approach. And that's where I am. Listen, if my grandchild was born with cystic fibrosis, severe lung disease, I'd say, listen, have them take the vaccines because, a viral illness or a bacterial illness could take them down. It could be fatal. But again, a healthy child born today is healthier, free of all these vaccines. They're just, obviously you can't have a vaccine side effect if you don't take any vaccines. And, the way God has made us naturally is to be nowadays very robust to illness. And on top of that, we have treatment approaches. Yeah.
I think we could do a whole nother hour on the aspects of shedding. But could you speak to that a little bit for those who aren't maybe familiar with it, and then also address for those who maybe didn't take any shots, what are the risks, especially we're talking about COVID antibody test and those aspects of shedding? I know my own daughter's experienced some of that. She was away at a small liberal arts program, and there were 6 ladies in the same, master suite that they were all sharing. And all of them, you could tell that my daughter, who'd never taken any of them, was impacted. Her menstrual cycle was impacted. Her menstrual cycles were impacted. So anyway, what are the aspects of shedding that we ought to know about and maybe consider, even if you didn't order to taking their shots?
Okay. Well, let's just take general vaccines first. Any vaccine that's a live vaccine, a live virus vaccine, if you take that shot, you can give it to somebody else. That's called shedding. And it says right there in the warnings. So like the flu shot that's a little squirt up the kid's nose, it says right in the insert, if the kids take this, don't bring them around grandmother because they can just give their grandmother the flu. It spreads directly. Another example is measles, mumps, and rubella. I tell you, listen, if you take the shot, be careful going around somebody who's got a depressed immune system. Chickenpox vaccine. So shedding is very real. With the COVID shots, especially the ones we took in the United States, we're not given the live virus, but we're given the genetic code for the spike protein. And it's now been shown the spike protein and the genetic code end up in secretions. So for instance, Pfizer and Moderna and the spike protein is found in breast milk of women breastfeeding. So for sure it comes out in breast milk. Breast milk is modified sweat. So for sure it's coming out in sweat, for sure. and little packets called exosomes as we breathe out. So people can actually breathe it out onto someone else. Now, what's the degree of transference, and can this really transfer a vaccine? I'm looking at the data carefully. It's never been described about a complete transference, but lots of shedding has been described and published. And I think that people do get a challenge from the spike protein, which may not be a bad thing because you actually may, develop some immunity to it. So I think shedding does occur. There's never been a documented case of transference by blood transfusion. Remember, units of blood only last on the shelf 42 days. And, so chances are someone donating today, since very few people have taken the vaccines, and we don't know how long after someone takes the vaccine are they hot, meaning hot that they could actually just directly transfer it. The CDC has always said, listen, 90 days. We're not sure about 90 days. Be careful. I think for a lot of people, I've extended it to 6 months. And I have to say, so many young people contact me on Instagram. And the first thing they say is, Dr. McCullough, my girlfriend took the vaccines, and I'm really worried about transference or shedding. And, is this okay, or something like this? And I always say, I hope you're doing safe sex techniques. And usually there's a little bit of a pause on the response. So be careful. Yes. Other questions?
As a repentant and recovering big pharma employee years ago, we've seen obviously the connection between big pharma and even the support and funding of medical school and medical school research. How do we, as the average U.S. citizen, affect change there if the government doesn't appear that they are interested in creating some type of division between that conflict of interest? Do you have thoughts on that?
We have conflict of interest disclosures. The problem is nothing's done about it. So there have been several different offerings to me personally. And so I've gone through White House ethics and HHS ethics reviews, and just add infinite investigation into my background and all of these things. And it's always stated, well, you must disclose this. Okay, well, I disclosed it, but nothing's ever done about the disclosure. That's the problem. And, a conflict of interest is when there's a triangle. So you have, let's say, an entity, a pharmaceutical company, and then some type of outcome, a committee, a school board, or what have you, and that the financial entity makes it so you have a financial stake in the outcome, and your decision actually leads to harm to that third party. So the example is this. Here's an example of unchecked conflict of interest. Paul Offit, Dr. Offit's at University of Pennsylvania, was on CNN numerous times. I was on some of the other channels, and we'd be on prime time. Well, Paul Offit is an inventor of the rotavirus vaccine. He was on the vaccine approval panel for the CDC, called ACIP, the Advisory Panel for Immunization Practices. He was there in the years to actually get his vaccine approved so every kid in America would get his vaccine. He holds the patent on that. That's a straight line conflict of interest. That never should have happened. It never should have. So we should stand up and say, listen, conflicts exist because people are working in this biotech space, as you have, as I have, but we need ways of actually taking action on these conflicts of interest. Right now, the only action is we expose them. So the American Academy of Pediatrics has been exposed as taking vaccine money, then turning around pushing for COVID shots. And now they're, I guess, humiliated or disgraced, or are now trying to recalibrate what they do. But we need to take action on conflicts of interest. And we have to understand that conflicts of interest now are ubiquitous. What the White House and HHS ethics say is that, listen, if you come as a government employee and you violate these rules, you're subject to federal law, which is true, and they read you the law, but no one ever actually takes action on the law. Very good point. Oh, one good point about a conflict of interest too. The biggest sources of conflict of interest are not receiving direct money, because all that has to be reported on the income tax. Most of it is the future employment and consulting opportunities. So 9 out of the last 10 US FDA commissioners took sweetheart jobs with big pharma, or pharma venture capital companies. Like Scott Gottlieb is one of my contemporaries. He was an FDA commissioner. He was on the board of Pfizer. So Scott was going on CNBC. Guess what he was telling people to do? Take a Pfizer vaccine. That's a straight conflict of interest. Stephen Hahn, who followed him, who ushered in Pfizer Moderna vaccines, he took a job for Flagship Pioneer, which is a venture capital firm for Moderna. So the greatest conflict of interest is future employment. And one of the things we could see is what's called restrictive covenants. We have these in medicine. Someone takes a government job like this, maybe they should, not go into related biopharmaceuticals for 5 years. So that way they're not induced. You can imagine the discussions. By the way, the top public health official in the UK and Denmark did the same thing. They took jobs right into Moderna. So it's obvious they're making decisions regarding the vaccines, and then they're offered a sweetheart position. Other questions?
I want to thank you for an excellent presentation. You successfully make me very skeptical of science, which of course the downside is I'm now skeptical of everything you just said. But seriously, I appreciate it. Could you kind of race past it? This cooperation between Dr. Fauci and the Chinese to develop just what you understand the agenda for doing this to be.
In our book, which you're going to get a copy of, we divide this history into eras. And we think from 2003 forward, the major thrust of vaccinology, we actually call it the bioweapons era. And it starts out with actually a Bioweapons Act in 2004, which said that, we're going to get into the business of developing pathogens for a dual purpose. And the Obama administration actually passed legislation on this. So a pathogen of a dual purpose is a virus, a bacteria, or a fungi that can actually make the whole world sick. That's one purpose of it. But the other purpose is to simultaneously make a countermeasure. So a countermeasure is a military term that's now in the vaccine world. And a countermeasure is a vaccine, a therapeutic, or some other contagion control measure. So this actually got baked into this new era of creating biological threats for the purpose of making a countermeasure. And so you can imagine the country that makes a biological threat, and they hold it, and they also hold the answer, let's say a vaccine, they hold power. Just like a country that has a nuclear weapon and has a nuclear defense system, they have power. So this bioweapons era, we think, is about power. And that's the reason why the governments are in this. We have multiple government agencies in this business. There's very well-paid contractors in this business. We have 14 biosecurity level 4 labs in the United States. On average, by the way, they have about a dozen leaks per year. This has been published in a paper by Blacksell and colleagues. This is scary. There's one in Galveston, one of the biosecurity labs. We're in this business. Some believe that there's a race, that if we're not in this business and if we don't race ahead and make the worst virus ever, someone's going to beat us to the punch and now we're going to be under threat from somebody else. So we're in this. So the purpose of the creation of SARS-CoV-2, I truly believe, just like in the papers by Dr. Ralph Baric, it was poised for human emergence. They were ready to go and potentially injure populations. And in those same papers, they were trying to create a vaccine. I don't think they intentionally let it out of the lab. There's some report, former CDC Director Redfield, when he testified, he said, listen, they were having problems with the air conditioning system. Maybe something happened and a virus came out. The first person sick actually probably worked in the lab. She went to the fish market. Some people got sick there. But Fauci's role in this, like in NIH, and there's the main division of the NIH that does this is called BARDA. That was Rick Bright. Rick Bright was clearly involved in this. Rick Bright was installed under Obama, and he was kept under Trump. And we mentioned him in our book. Rick Bright saw this happening. And when Trump came out and said, listen, COVID's out, the data are encouraging with hydroxychloroquine. We should give it a shot. We were using this in our practice. I was one of the first to publish on this. It looked like it had a partial beneficial effect. Rick Bright dropped everything, and he launched a government campaign against hydroxychloroquine. He broke every rule possible that's out there. No, it doesn't work. Don't use it. It's unsafe. He propagated, and at the same time, he shuttled $500 million over to Moderna, even before Operation Warp Speed. So we found that in this world, there's tremendous corruption, this what we call biopharmaceutical complex, which is this complex of not-for-profit organizations, government agencies, research agencies, the military, biopharmaceutical companies, regulatory agencies. They're dealing with trillions of dollars. Trillions. This is big. This is bigger than the defense industry. I mean, we're talking big, big, big. And they are able to tremendously profit on this. The Gates Foundation invested this much in BioNTech before anything was going on, and they made this much out. And they don't pay taxes on that. They're a not-for-profit organization. You can imagine how this is going now. So everybody is taking care of everybody else. It's believed, and this is from personal communication with Scott Atlas, and Scott was writing op-eds for The Hill in 2020 by invitation from Stanford. I was writing them from Baylor. Both of us, we are the two doctors kind of informing the House, the White House, and the Senate on what's going on in 2021. Scott believes that Fauci actually went to Biden and said, I need a pardon. And it's got to be 10 years. It's got to cover this whole development of SARS-CoV-2. He knows he committed crimes. For sure, fraudulent concealment over the origins of SARS-CoV-2. It should have come out. It's in his emails. It came out in the House investigation. He should have said, listen, we were creating this and things got out of hand. He should have leveled with us. We could have actually responded differently. He didn't do that. He actually worked to cover it up for a long period of time. The second major crime was the intentional suppression of treatment. That's what Rick Bright tried to do. And it was everything. All forms of treatment of COVID were suppressed in order to advance this vaccine agenda. That was the holy grail of vaccinating the entire world. They all publicly aspired for it, for sure. What's so interesting about Fauci, there's books written on him, from Peter Bregan's book on COVID-19, The Global Predators, to Rand Paul's book directly on Fauci, Robert F. Kennedy's directly. The timeline is there of all the crimes he's committed and his involvement with COVID, which we all watched on TV. When Fauci published his final goodbye, when he retired from the National Institutes of Health, on their webpage, and he describes when he got there and everything he's done, do you know, on his goodbye memorandum, no mention of the pandemic or COVID, as if it never happened. This is absolutely stunning. It's absolutely stunning. I don't think he was necessarily the mastermind in this. I think it was much more a collaborative, and I do think things got out of hand. But these crimes people have to look at. People truly did die of COVID. How many people here know somebody who died of COVID, who really died of COVID? For sure, so do I. It was a bad disease. Not for everyone, and it was grossly over-exaggerated, the risks of it, but some people really died. How many people know somebody who's been injured, disabled, or died after the vaccine? It's about the same, or even greater. Think about that. 2 waves of injury. This engineered virus that we all got, 97% of us got it, and now the vaccine, 81% of us got that.
I've been doing a lot of research because I lost my dad in 2020 to the COVID protocol at Vanderbilt. I know there's a man that I found that's researching, Dr. Dennis, who was working on things with coronavirus at Vanderbilt. It's amazing because he was connected to Chapel Hill with all the other guys. So when you're mentioning these things, I'm familiar with all of them because I did a lot of research after my dad died. And when I found out, a lot of it was going on at Chapel Hill before it was moved to Iran. Have you heard that?
Right. So there's many, if you look at the authors on the major papers where they discover they've created the virus, and these are very high-level molecular biology journals. So Proceedings in the National Academy of Sciences and Nature Medicine. I commonly post them and repost them so people can see them. By the way, those 2 papers were never mentioned or examined in any House proceeding. And I said, Brad Wenstrup, I went on Fox News with Brad one time, and I just said it point blank, they will not examine these papers. These 2 papers where they describe the creation of the virus, anytime there's a federal project that creates a new virus or a new genetic code, they must release the genetic code to ClinGen, the National Data Bank on Genetic Codes. Barrick to this day will not release the genetic code. He's the senior author from UNC Chapel Hill. People said, why not? Well, I've been advised by the NIH not to release the code. Why not? The full code of the Wuhan virus is known. We knew that within a few weeks of the outset of the pandemic. Why won't he release the code from 2016? Because they exactly match, or they're very close to matching? That's the suspicion. But it's clear that this was a consortium. In fact, in 2018, there's a paper published from the Rocky Mountain Research Laboratory, which is an NIH laboratory in Montana, Hamilton, Montana. They've got like 30 buildings up there, 400 employees up in the Rocky Mountains. And they reported on taking a virus almost identical to the COVID virus and tried to infect fruit bats in this laboratory. And they couldn't get it to infect bats. And that paper reported that. So there's evidence that the COVID virus was in UNC Chapel Hill, Hamilton, Montana, clearly in Wuhan, China. We don't know where else. When Peter Daszak at the EcoHealth Alliance, who is the NGO that was shuttling the plans to China, when he testified, now he's been debarred from federal research. When he testified, he said, listen, he had gone, by the way, to Wuhan hundreds of times, Peter Daszak. He was in the lab. And when he was asked to go with WHO to investigate, he goes, I don't know where this virus came from, but it didn't come from the lab. He was there, part of the creation team. He obviously deceived us. Under oath in Congress, he later on said, I've got dozens and dozens of more samples of other similar viruses there. What does he have? COVID-20? COVID-21? This is the great concern, that unless we get control over these biolabs and understand what's going on, every time I've testified at the state level, the wonderful senators and congressmen say, Dr. McCullough, what can we do? I said, why don't you do an inventory of what gain-of-function research is being done in your state right now in university laboratories? I'm sure Vandy's got a lot of things going on. We've got a big one in Texas. Why don't we figure out this? And are there threats to the public? It's like doing nuclear missile research at the University of Tennessee with no regulation. Oh, a missile shot off one day. It's completely unregulated. Even the Biden guidelines on this is all voluntary reporting. We've got to get a hand. We've already been sick once. People have lost their lives over a giant man-made biological experiment. We can't have this happen again. People need to step up and say, listen, what are we doing about this? Trump did what he could. Trump said, okay, I'm going to pull the funding for dangerous gain-of-function research. That's partially helpful, but let me tell you what, the Chinese are funding tremendous numbers of projects. The Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Trust, Wellcome Trust, the pharmaceutical companies are funding these projects. It's still game on. You get a big Moderna grant into Vanderbilt, that's game on for gain-of-function research because they're going to try to come up with a new vaccine. They're in this biological arms race. Yes?
About the suppression of alternate treatments during the pandemic so as to create the need for everybody to be vaccinated. What's the agenda for that? Is it the vaccine ideology that says, no, this is the only way we can be safe from it, or is it something else?
I think part of it is vaccine ideology. Even for measles, there's suppression of treatment. We found this. There was a measles outbreak in Texas. And there was a report of a girl who died of measles, and she was part of the Mennonite community. By the way, the Mennonites, they're not taking vaccines, and neither are the Amish. They're not going to take them. And I've talked to them. They're not. And this little girl gets measles, and we realize she doesn't get any of the fundamentals. I mean, there's protective immunoglobulins for contacts. There's vitamin A protocols, secondary antibiotics, inhaled steroids. Nothing. She goes 2 to 3 times to urgent cares in the ER. She gets no treatment. And then when the poor thing's finally admitted, she dies probably of a bacterial pneumonia. Early treatment is suppressed. And, the only thing that came out on CNN when Sanjay Gupta came out and others came out, oh, she should have taken a vaccine. We need to push more vaccines. So there's suppression of treatment to advance vaccines. It's been going on for a long time. There's something about it. There's this love affair with vaccines. A vaccine should be the only solution. Well, I can tell you with COVID, the vaccine simply didn't work. And people who took the vaccines were readily getting COVID very frequently. They were pouring into hospitals. Anthony Fauci got on TV in April of 2020 and said, listen, they're not working. We're going to have to get out boosters. It should have been obvious to everybody. And even when last time I testified in the Senate, Richard Blumenthal got up there and said, well, the vaccines save lives. Well, wait a minute. They didn't stop transmission. They didn't stop infections. There's actually multiple studies showing negative efficacy. They actually, people who took them got more COVID. And there's not a single valid study showing that they reduce mortality. There's a paper in New England Journal of Medicine taking the world's population and assuming the vaccines save 75% of the lives during the first wave and 50% later. But that's just a giant assumption. There's no proof of that at all. In general, vaccines that really work, you don't get the disease to begin with. And the mechanism by which mortality goes down is because you don't get the disease that causes death. Not that the vaccine freely and fully lets you get the disease and somehow magically protects you against death. So I think there was a suppression of all forms of treatment. This is important. People heard about hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. Let me tell you, there was suppression of nasal sprays. Nasal sprays and gargles worked great. Federal Trade Commission sued every single company trying to make nasal sprays and kept the lawsuits going on for years so they couldn't possibly get any traction. I know the CEO of one of them. I know the CEO of two of actually. The government sued one of the biggest companies making vitamin D. And vitamin D actually is very simple and actually had favorable data. The government and the medical community, by the way, also heavily suppressed other things that were useful. So monoclonal antibodies, which were Operation Warp Speed, high tech, they worked. They were great. I used them a ton. The United States government bought a dose for every single person in this country to get a monoclonal antibody. We should have had nursing homes stocked with these things. Your dad should have gotten them. My dad should have gotten them. Couldn't find them. Distribution problems, can't get to them. The government we had 6 of these. The government took them off the market as soon as they put them on the market. We suppressed our own wonderful creations of Operation Warp Speed. Paxlovid was an oral drug, came out 2 years too late, but it came out, it was partially effective. What did the government do? Within a few weeks, safety warnings, it prolongs the illness, it causes rebound. They cast all this doubt on Paxlovid, probably justifiably so, and essentially suppressed treatment. Molnupiravir was another drug that came out. No mention of that. So the government suppressed everything. The only thing we were told was take a vaccine. And it's interesting, the only vaccines promoted were the genetic vaccines. That's another mystery. Why is it always Pfizer or Moderna? We have a non-genetic vaccine. It's called Novavax. You've probably never heard of it. The CDC never mentions it. The FDA never mentions it. It's the only one. It has a markedly better safety profile than those other vaccines. Why didn't we feature the safest vaccine? No country in the world has issued a safety review on the vaccines. No country in the world has opened the vials to inspect them for quality, purity, concentration. No country in the world has taken them off the market. Why? We have to ask ourselves the questions. You probably know the answer.
Regarding having vaccines too early or too much at once, is that as bad or worse in other countries?
It's worse than the United States. Good question. Bundling all these vaccines and giving them intensively early on, it's really particularly severe in the United States. Let me give you an example. There's a great concern just bundling measles, mumps, and rubella together could be a driver for these neuropsychiatric disorders. There's plenty of studies suggesting the association, not a single valid study ruling it out for sure. Do you know the Japanese looked at this back in 1993 and said, this doesn't look good. This does not look good. We will not allow combining measles, mumps, and rubella together. So the Japanese separate them out. Fine. But virtually every other country has a lighter schedule.
Hi, I'm Carol Swain. I think we've met before. And my question, it may be something that you really don't want to talk about. It has to do with the fact that the shutdown of everything and the impact on the population, the scare tactics. If the death rate had been what they had predicted, it would have fit perfectly with the goals of the environmentalists who say that our population is not sustainable. And Bill Gates in particular, who invests in all this reproductive science as well as vaccines, and he has very much stated that we needed to reduce the population. And so with the government not allowing doctors to prescribe whatever treatments they wanted for their patients, that never happened before. And it just seems to me that a lot of the irrationality that we've seen globally could have been connected to the efforts to reduce population. And I know that if you say this openly, you are dismissed as a conspiracy theorist, but sometimes conspiracy theorists are correct.
You're not a conspiracy theorist, you're a rational theorist. Remember, there are 6 propaganda terms that all of you should be on guard for. You're the first one to throw it out. No one has actually thrown out the other 5 right now, but you should all know these 6 terms and you should know how to deal with them. So I right away, now she wasn't calling me a conspiracy theorist. If anything, you were calling yourself a conspiracy theorist, but I immediately knew to say rational theorist. So anytime someone says conspiracy theorist, say, listen, we all have theories. The rational theories, let's discuss them. Conspiracy theorist is a way of shutting somebody down. You're a conspiracy theorist. I'm going to shut you down. Here are the other 5. Misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, anti-vaxxer, and anti-science. Every time they're used to shut somebody down. So the first time I testified in the U.S. Senate, this is November of 2020, under oath, and I've already published the world's first multi-drug, peer-reviewed protocol to treat COVID-19, became known as the McCullough Protocol, in the American Journal of Medicine, a very highly ranked medical journal. I'm bringing America a potential solution. I'm proposing this in the U.S. Senate. The minority chairman, Gary Peters from Michigan, with his black mask on, right before I talked, I was being introduced, he goes, what America is about to hear is misinformation. Before a word came out of my mouth, what was he trying to do? He was trying to gain leverage over me. He was trying to discredit me. He was trying to smear me. He was trying to injure me. And he was trying to suppress vital information to the country. What got in his mind? All I can tell you is the same thing that got in his mind 5 years later is in the mind of Richard Blumenthal, who was the minority chairman at the last Senate hearing. And when he got up there and he said the word misinformation, I was ready. And probably a lot of you saw that tape. I looked at him. And listen, when I go to the U.S. Senate to testify, I'm not like Robert F. Kennedy. I'm not looking for a job. I'm there flying on my own dime, paying my own money for the hotel, getting my own Uber, taking time away from my practice to bring America important information. I looked him straight in the eye. I said, I never want to see a public servant ever use a propaganda term. That misinformation is a propaganda term, and it's straight out of Nazi Germany and post-World War II Stalinist Russia. It's used to harm people. Don't accept that. Don't accept that. When we have a new emerging problem, no one has agency over the truth. There is no consensus. It's a brand new problem. No one is more correct than someone else. We should have been having discussions and open meetings all the time. The first thing medical organizations did is they shut down everything. Oh, so we can't discuss this. Be leery. They shut down churches. Was your church shut down? They made us meet out in the parking lot. But they were so convinced, there were some pastors in this country, and I've met them, they got put in jail for keeping their church open. There's Art Pawlowski in Alberta. They not only put him in jail, but they put him in jail for a long time in solitary confinement because he was trying to guarantee his parishioners the right to worship. But back to your question. Now, right. So right. So what I'll say to that, Ms. Swain, is whether it's intentional or unintentional, for sure the effect is going to blunt population growth, if not reduce population growth. Every statistic shows that. So there's a paper by Manichev from the Czech Republic showing the women who took the vaccine and the men, as they try to conceive, that their fertility rates are way down, for sure. Vaccinated young people are going to have trouble having kids. Not all of them, but for sure. People who took the vaccine, 12 studies show they're more likely to die sooner, for sure. The writing is on the wall. Age expectancy is coming down for those who took the vaccine. And I don't think the rest of us are completely out of the woods. I'm seeing signs that even among those of us who had the infection and didn't take the vaccine, there's problems. Okay? And the problems may be along the lines of heart disease and cancer. Cancer rates will go up. The most common cancers are going up. Forms of heart disease are going up. It may be that both the virus and the vaccines have worked to do exactly what you've suggested to reduce the population.
I'm going further, and I'm curious pretty much at my age whether I'm called a conspiracy theorist, but it just seems like with the Great Reset and the globalization and the belief, that there's certain kinds of people that we don't need. And I'm not just talking about minorities, I'm talking about elderly and poor people and just those kinds of people. I'm not so sure that it isn't by design, that this gain of function and the accident at the Wuhan clinic that actually upset our way of life in America, that all this stuff didn't happen accidentally. I think it was done on purpose. And you're familiar with the conference they had at what was it, Johns Hopkins University the fall before COVID in 2019, where they laid out everything they were going to do, and people that attended invested in the vaccines. And so it's too much to be a coincidence.
Well, is there any truth to what she said? Was the rate of COVID death higher in African Americans? Yes. No, but let me finish. The answer is yes. It's about double. COVID deaths were about double in African Americans compared to non-African Americans, for sure. Is there any truth to what she said? Did the elderly and frail die at a higher rate with COVID? For sure. I mean, 40% of people were beyond life expectancy, for sure. Now, where's the saving grace in this? What's the population in the United States that had the lowest rate of COVID vaccination? African Americans. So only 44% of African Americans took 2 shots. So they're going to be less participatory in these vaccine injuries. We're going to have to see the play of this. The CDC will not release the vaccine administration data. They will not tell us who took the vaccine and who didn't so we can do research. This is a federal database. The CDC releases every other database. We have the National Death Index, the National Center for Health Statistics. We have the cancer registries. They will not release the vaccine administration data.
Well, they had people going out into the communities, the Black communities, paid to push the vaccine.
Yes.
And Black people are just more suspicious. I never took the vaccine. I never took it because things didn't add up. What they were saying, I looked at the statistics. I looked at that CNN monitor that showed all these people dropping dead by the seconds, and it just didn't add up.
Listen, I'm as white as it gets. I didn't take them either, but I'm a small fraction of doctors who didn't take the COVID shots, and I saw the same thing when that death counter was running on CNN. Remember, you saw that death counter running. I remember mentioning it to my wife because one of my patients actually died during that time. It took me 6 weeks to finalize the death certificate on my patient. How is that meter running every day? I mean, there's at least a 6-week lag. So we knew something was juiced up. And so what we learned is that how the government kept it was test positive at any time and death at any time became a COVID death. So it grossly over-exaggerated the deaths. In the National Center for Health Statistics data, half the COVID deaths, there's no pneumonia on the chart. None. And so if it carefully adjudicated, I would say probably 10% of 1.2 million deaths were truly COVID deaths, like your dad. For sure, a legit COVID death. 10%. So that's 120,000 people in the United States died of COVID. I testified under oath if they would have gotten early treatment, the full McCullough protocol, antibodies, monoclonal antibodies, oral antiviral, steroids, colchicine, antithrombotics, home oxygen, I think we could have saved 85% of them. Of course, the later we got in the pandemic, the better we were. But by the end of 2020, we had clear and convincing evidence. How many people died of the vaccine? I told you 19,400. That's probably underreported 30-fold in the FDA testimony. 30 times 19,400, about 560,000 Americans died of the vaccine.
Thank you, Dr. McCullough.